Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this episode of Really Dicey. I'm here with Eugene Marshall of Arcanist Press. I'm so glad that we get to speak to you today. I'm a big fan of the Ancestry and Culture Alternative to Race and 5e book that you released through Drive Through RPG and other sites. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me here.
So I know recently you put out a new book. It's sort of a continuation of the Ancestry and Culture book called More Ancestries and Culture. So
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit about that first, because I'm intrigued that we now have 64 more options for customization. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So, Ancestry and Culture, an alternative to Race and 5e, the Kickstarter, and then product on Drive-Thru, just used the core races from the Dungeons and Dragons open gaming license covered system reference document. So that's like High Elf, Mountain Dwarf, just like basic one sub race of each race, Dragonborn, Tiefling. None of the stuff from any of the supplement books, and not even second or third sub races of the main books, because that's all that's allowed to be used under the open gaming license. So there's really only 7 or 8 choices, right? But what I wanted to do is I wanted to give players rules that they could use with very little effort to cover any of the published races and anything that they might think of. And so More Ancestries and Cultures, combined with, there is another expansion book called Custom Ancestries and Cultures, gives 120 something options. And for every published race in Fifth Edition, official Fifth Edition Dungeons and Dragons book, there is a kind of analog in these books. Now they can't be the same because of copyright, but they are inspired by those. So if you want an Aarakocra, well, you can't do that. That's copyright Dungeons and Dragons, but there is Birdfolk, right? And so on. So that sort of thing. So what More Ancestries and Cultures provides are 64 options, many of which are playable versions of an ancestry and a culture based on either a playable race from D&D 5th edition or a monster that is a sentient creature that you could play as a character, or a few of the old playable races from earlier editions, homages to them as well.
Okay. Do you have a favorite customization from the new book that you're kind of have close to your heart? Anything like that?
That's a tough one. So this book in particular was hard because the custom ancestries and cultures were all races suggested by the Kickstarter backers. And so I didn't really have much choice. But in this one, I got to kind of make my own. And so I kind of really like the monstrous ones, the ones that are inspired by monsters. So for example, I've got an oozling, which is a humanoid ooze person you can play. And there's the kind of sub races, if you will, of these ancestries are ones that have descended from magically hybridized of, gelatinous cube, black pudding, those sorts of beings, just because it's so unusual and interesting. So that's a lot of fun. I like. I've got one that's inspired by myconids. It's called the psilocybe. Those are little mushroom people. Those are fun. You can play a blink dog. That's fun. So a few of those. I've got one other good one I have to mention. 2 other good ones I have to mention. On the cover, of course, is the owlbearkin, right, which is humanoid owlbear. And so you might think, what? No, wait a minute here. All these monstrous races, oozes that are people, owlbears that are playable. What? Okay, well, an owlbear itself is already a magical hybrid of an owl and a bear. So imagine somebody saying, owlbears are great. They're the toughest things around. I'd like to have soldiers that are owlbears. So, or something, so you can imagine different origin stories. I do write an imaginary one in the book as well, if you want one. And so then what that includes is a brief description of the creature, and then features that would be part of your character if you chose to be of such an ancestry, come from these parents or have been created magically in this way, and then what it might be like to live among these people in their culture. And so, of course, you can mix and match so that you are magically created owlbearkin, but you live among elves or whatever, and so adopt their cultural practices. That's the whole idea, of course, behind Ancestry Culture.
Okay. Would you say that this definitely carries over the main ideas from the Ancestry and Culture book, the main one, which to our viewers, if you're not too sure what we mean. So what Ancestry and Culture does, I mean, it's a very fascinating work. It's like it's part essay. You have really strong arguments about how why race should be replaced, the term race at least, and how it works in 5e, how it should be definitely should be updated.
Hmm.
And then you go into this I guess you could say formula of how you can take race, break it apart to ancestry and culture, and you can mix things up so that you can have some very fascinating, unique characters without using racist tropes
Right.
in D&D. So does that those ideas would that carry over very much into the new book?
Yeah, absolutely. Same worldview, perspective, mechanic. So you can pick any of these as an ancestry, any of these cultures, and then mix and match them with either the ones in this book or the other books. This book does have, and the second thing that continues is we make sure that there aren't problematic features. So it's one problem is just, isn't it weird that when you play D&D, you choose a race and that gives you your language and your skills, when of course something like who your parents are does not determine what your language is or what you do for a living, right? But in D&D, if your parents are dwarves, then you are expert with smithing tools or something, right? And have dwarven weapon training. And speak dwarvish. Okay, so I'm thinking that's odd. What if a dwarf was raised by elves, right? Or or what if, to use a classic example from fantasy, the fantasy canon, what if you're Aragorn and a human raised by elves, right? You'll be human, but you'll have a bunch of elvish feature, or like abilities or something. And so that's what this lets you do. It just says, well, you take the biological features like dark vision and your age and all that stuff, and from this class, or I'm sorry, this race, like elf or dwarf or Alberkin, and claws or wings or whatever, and then the things like language and skills and proficiencies and stuff like that. That's all on the culture side, and so you can just mix and match. The second thing that's a feature is we took out in the original book, and we followed through in this book. Any of the traits that are kind of, I don't know, lean kind of heavily on real world racist kind of tropes. So, for example, half orcs in the player's handbook have savage attacks and are menacing. So that means that in principle, having one orc parent just automatically means you are savage and menacing. Nothing to do with where you're raised, or how you want to behave or choose to act or anything. So I thought, well, that's kind of junky. So I changed it in the original book to a confident attack. So no, it's powerful attacks, and then confident is the trait. So and those are cultural features. So if you were raised in an orcish community, those might be things that you are taught, like how to make a powerful attack, or that confidence is a virtue that is valued. And again, though, so we do that again in this. So there are no traits here that are, leaning on overly simplistic, maybe kind of yucky tropes that remind us of real world prejudice. There is one new thing in this book, though, and that's that there's also a set of cultures based on just geography, right? Because some of the cultures, having cultures named after races seems to be kind of, you're switching like racism for some sort of cultural essentialism or something. Like you're over what all elven cultures behave one way. That's not realistic or whatever. So we also have like woodland culture and coastal culture and mountain cultures and things. So if you wanted to take, I'll be an owlbear kin, but I was raised in the woods, so I have this kind of like forest culture traits. You can do that too. But otherwise, and yes, and I keep forgetting things that are in this book. It's been like 6 months since I wrote it. Planes as well, same thing, but you could be like, I'm an elf, but I was raised on the plane of limbo, or in that one of the in one of the lower planes or one of the upper planes or something like that. So there's lots of options, and again, this is all just using the core stuff that we all are familiar with from Dungeons and Dragons, without, of course, violating any copyright, but just mixing and matching in a way that I think just seems kind of common sense, right? Well, what if a halfling was raised by orcs? Wouldn't they know how to speak Orcish, right? The orc language, right? Instead of halfling.
Yeah. No, and I'm really glad that these rules exist now. If you play long enough, you will come across a point where like, okay, I play this elf the same way 1,000 times. Can I do something different? Something that breaks the norm, you know? So I'm really glad that this exists for 5e. Sort of wish this existed for 2e back in the days, but that's okay.
Right.
um, so have you read or looked at Tasha's Cauldron of Everything?
I have.
So your book came out before that
Mhm.
book came out, and Tasha dealt with race, maybe like 2 pages of
Yeah.
customization rules. Um, is there what are your thoughts to that concerning your book? Like, is there for anyone that has
Mm.
both your book and Tasha's book, is there any changes they need to do? Is there any advice or modifications that they need to be aware of?
So if anybody owns both, I mean, I think that you can use both at the same time. I think that uh, the Tasha's race options, page and a half or two, right at the beginning. I'm glad that Wizards of the Coast is starting to kind of work towards addressing some of this stuff. They have more work to do, but I guess so do we all. But big corporations take longer time to turn the ship than a small producer creator like me. But basically, the way I read Tasha's is it's really just making much more explicit some of the advice given all the way back in 2014 in the Player's Handbook and DM's Guide, which is, if there's something about your character that you don't like, talk to your DM and we can work out a different set of rules, or move the ability scores or proficiencies around. I mean, things like that are already allowed by the rules, but this just makes it really explicit. Work with your GM or DM to uh, swap out your ability score increases or something, or take a different language. And I think all of us who've been playing D&D, role-playing games in general, for a long time kind of already knew, well, yes, if there's something you don't like, you homebrew it away. But it is nice to see them very explicitly acknowledging it, and that also means that it's something you can use in Adventurers League play and that sort of thing, because it's in an official book. However, it really didn't address what I describe as a kind of deeper problem, which is the problem isn't just that the ability scores are attached to biology. That's part of the problem, right? It is kind of weird that people of a certain biological heritage are naturally smarter or stronger or tougher or that, or more charismatic. That kind of falls back on people of this race are smarter, people of that race are stronger tropes in the real world. And of course, no, orcs and elves aren't one for one correlations to real world ethnic groups or races. However, lots of times people don't like to see things that are unpleasant or upsetting in the real world show up in their game, right? There's all kinds of things. Like, I don't like to play a game with various forms of, I don't know, sexual harassment or something. That's not something I want to role play, right? So lots of people don't really like role playing racism either. And so when you're forced to face that, right, in character creation, it's kind of a bummer for some people. But it's more than just ability scores. It's also those savage attacks and menacing traits and things like that. It's just the assumption that there's this category race that determines so much about you. But again, it's a good start. So if you wanted to mix them together, you just mix and match your ability scores as you see fit. Disregard alignment, because it's pretty much useless with regards to guiding you how to, decide you create your character, and then choose an ancestry and culture from one of our books. And I think those work well together.
All right, excellent. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. Where can people check out more of your work?
Well, on Drive-Through RPG, we've got the 2 expansion books in the core book and character sheets and stuff like the pre-gens. We've got a new project that we literally just pitched this morning that's big and new, and I can't talk about it yet because of NDAs. So we'll see how that goes. Otherwise, I am myself, not as Arcanist Press, am doing work with Sigil Entertainment and Avaz Media, putting out a weekly Monster of the Week called Book of Beasts, and it features a bunch of monsters and creatures from global folklore that mostly from cultures that don't get a lot of attention in canonical mainstream D&D. So right now we've been focusing a lot on Southeast Asian creatures. And the thing I'm really happy about is I'm not making these things because I'm not Southeast Asian. We have Southeast Asian creators who are creating these creatures, and then we are putting them up on the web, and with the hope of maybe eventually putting these together in a collection. And I really like spotlighting those creators because they're doing really amazing work.
Okay, excellent. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. And to our viewers out there, thank you for watching. Please be safe and have a good day. Take care.